This was the world's first pandemic prison. Not built of stone, but of water. For 40 days, you lived aboard your own ship, chained to an island where no Venetian would set foot. Food lowered by rope, waste dumped overboard, and every dawn, guards counted how many of you still breathed. Venice, 1403, the richest city on earth. Not because of gold, but because of betrayal. While plague devoured Europe, Venice made a Faustian bargain: keep the ports open, or starve. Every dawn, ships arrived from Alexandria carrying silk, from Constantinople bearing spices, from Crimea with furs, and hidden in their holds rats, fleas, death itself. For decades, Venice played Russian roulette with pandemics, one ship in 100 carried plague. But close the ports for 1 month, the city would collapse. So they gambled, and in 1403, they lost everything. But here's what history books bury. Venice didn't just survive this catastrophe, they invented something so brutal. It became humanity's blueprint for pandemic control for 600 years. And it began not with medicine, but with a single decree that transformed islands into open-air tombs. No more ships in our canals. No more merchants in our streets. We will build prisons in the water where God himself cannot reach them. They chose 2 islands in the lagoon, not for beauty but for damnation. Lazzaretto Vecchio 1423, the old quarantine for the sick, where plague victims were dumped to die. No doctors, no medicine, just a priest who rowed out once a week to give last rites. From a boat 50 feet offshore, Lazzaretto Nuovo 1468, the new quarantine for the well, where every ship from suspect ports had to anchor for 40 days. Quarantina sixtigla 40 days in Venetian dialect. The origin of our word quarantine. But here's the horror Venice buried for centuries. The 40-day countdown wasn't based on science. It was biblical theater. 40 days of rain in Noah's flood. 40 days of Moses on Sinai. Venice chose 40 days not because plague incubated that long, but because it felt holy. A ritual of purification. Even as men died on day 38, your fate depended on paperwork. A ship from Alexandria, 40 days. From plague-ridden Constantinople, 50 days. From a port with suspected cases, 60 days. And if someone developed symptoms mid-quarantine, the clock reset to 0. Hope became a renewable resource. Until it wasn't. But the true terror wasn't the waiting. It was the silence. Because on Lazzaretto Nuovo, no human voice was allowed to cross the water. Guards communicated by bell signals. Food lowered in baskets. And if you tried to swim to shore, archers waited on the beach with crossbows. Venice didn't just quarantine disease, they quarantined humanity itself. Imagine this countdown. Day 1 relief. We made it. Just 39 more days. Day 10, first fever. Panic. You isolate the sick man in the hold, but the rats have already spread fleas through the ship. Day 20, 3 dead. You wrap them in sailcloth and lower them overboard at night. The splash echoes across the lagoon. Day 30. Only you and a cabin boy remain. He's 14. He cries for his mother. You have no comfort to give. Day 39. The boy dies in your arms. You don't bury him. You can't bear to touch the body. Day 40. Dawn breaks. A bell rings on shore. You're alive. But you're not the man who arrived 40 days ago. And here's the secret the Venetian Senate ordered burned. Many ships never completed the 40 days. Because on day 35 or 38, guards would notice no movement on deck, no smoke from the galley. They'd wait 3 days, then send a single boat with 2 men in waxed robes. What they found inside those ships was why Venice mandated all quarantine logs be destroyed by fire. Venice didn't just quarantine plague, they quarantined the memory of plague. Because to admit how many died waiting would shatter the illusion that their system worked. But in 2020, archaeologists broke Venice's 600-year silence. Using ground-penetrating radar on Lazzaretto Nuovo, They discovered something that rewrote pandemic history forever. And what they found wasn't just bones. It was proof of a cover-up so vast, it changes how we understand every lockdown since. Archaeologists excavated the island in 2020. They found 1,500 skeletons buried in layers, not scattered, not random, but in organized trenches, as if bodies were processed like cargo. Carbon dating revealed the truth. These weren't just 14th century plague victims. Some died in 1576, others in 1630. Venice had been dumping plague dead on this healthy quarantine island for 200 years. The official records were lies. But the most haunting discovery? Personal artifacts buried with the dead. A merchant's ledger showing final transactions before quarantine. A child's leather shoe, tiny, hand-stitched. A love letter in Greek, sealed but never delivered. A single wildflower pressed between prayer book pages. These weren't statistics. They were people who believed Venice would protect them, who boarded ships thinking 40 days of waiting beats death, who never imagined their final act would be placing a flower in a book, as rats scurried over their dying bodies. A historian told we found this shoe in a grave with 3 skeletons, a mother, father, and child. They died together. Not in a house, not in a hospital, but on a ship anchored 200 feet from shore, watching Venice live its life without them. Which forces us to confront Venice's darkest secret. Quarantine wasn't invented to save lives. It was invented to save the economy. Because those 40 days didn't just isolate disease, they isolated blame. And in that isolation, Venice sacrificed the few to protect the many. The math hasn't changed in 550 years. When you trap humans on a vessel with no escape, Venice discovered 3 brutal truths. Truth 1, isolation breeds madness. After 30 days, men throw themselves overboard. They beg guards to shoot them. They eat rats raw. Venetian Guard Log 1523. Truth 2, economy always wins. Any ship where plague appears shall have its quarantine extended to 60 days. All personal effects confiscated. No compensation paid. This wasn't public health. This was economic triage. Venice calculated, losing one merchant's cargo was cheaper than closing ports for a month. So they sacrificed the few. To save the many, the floating prisons weren't for the sick, they were for the balance sheet. Truth 3, the shore always forgets. While men died waiting on Lazaretto, Venice celebrated Carnevale. The music carried across water. The dying heard every note. Monk's Diary, 1576, and in 2020. We repeated Venice's calculation exactly. When the Diamond Princess became a floating prison, when passengers begged to disembark, but were denied for economic reasons, we weren't making new mistakes. We were repeating a 600-year-old bargain. Some must die so the rest may trade. We tell ourselves we've conquered plague, but we've only modernized the floating prison. The chains are now Wi-Fi signals. The island is now your apartment. The 40-day countdown is now a 14-day app notification. The horror hasn't changed. We've just made it quieter.
Today, Lazaretto Nuovo is a park. Lazaretto Vecchio hosts art installations. The chains are gone, the barracks crumbled to dust, but the ghosts remain. Because every time a cruise ship is denied port during a pandemic, every time a neighborhood is locked down for 14 days, every time we choose economic survival over human connection, Venice's floating prisons rise again, not in wood and chain, but in policy and fear. Which brings us to the final, urgent truth Venice's ghosts demand we face. Quarantine doesn't reveal who we are. It reveals what we value more than human connection. And in every pandemic since 1423, the answer has been the same: trade, economy, the illusion of normalcy. We lock the sick away, not because we must, but because we refuse to stop the world for them. Venice saved itself. The floating prisons worked. Trade continued. The Republic survived plague after plague, while other cities collapsed. But at what cost? The bones on Lazaretto Nuovo don't just tell us about plague. They tell us about the moment humanity chose efficiency over empathy. The moment we decided some lives were acceptable losses in the machinery of commerce. We still do this. We float our prisons just offshore, out of sight, out of mind. Cruise ships with sick passengers. Detention centers on remote islands. Quarantine hotels at airport edges. We've perfected Venice's lesson: keep the dying close enough to control, but far enough to forget.